Does she count down or anything, or does she just start? You can go ahead whenever you're ready.
All right. Congressman Davidson, thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you very much. It's nice to talk with you.
I want to point out this is the first time you've been with us on Connect to Congress because you were elected in the fall. So thanks for being here. We'll give the audience a chance to get to know you a bit. We could spend the whole time on health care. We've got 4 or 5 topics I want to cover, but let's start with health care. The Congressional Budget Office said by 2026, 24 million Americans would lose health care coverage under the GOP proposed plan. The White House now says 14 million of that is overstated. Those people can re-enroll in another plan. But regardless, it sounds like a lot of people could lose insurance, and there's a lot of concern that the elderly and the sicker people would be paying higher premiums, and it would be almost unaffordable for more people. Your reaction to this, and do you think the plan has to be reworked in order to pass Congress?
Well, I do think it has to be reworked in order to pass, and I've been encouraged, actually just left a meeting over lunch where Vice President Pence met with us, and he shared that he's open to good ideas. The President is, and I think the leadership team in the House is. I'm hopeful that the Senate is. I think from what I hear, the Senate may have more challenges than the House does. But you're correct in the CBO score, and when you look at the CBO, I've always looked at it just as a news junkie before I was in Congress and tried to make sense of what do these numbers mean. And even prior to getting here, I'm like, well, I trust the CBO's numbers looking backward, but going forward, they've got a lot of constraints. They never do dynamic scoring when you do taxes, for example. So here in CBO, they're scoring something differently than tax projections, they're saying, and I think they're having a debate, and the number is shocking, 24 million, and it's tragic when someone would lose their insurance, and I think when you just run those list of things together, for a lot of people, it blends stuff. So I think it's important to understand what did the Affordable Care Act do, and it did not change Medicaid. Traditional Medicaid is for people in nursing homes, for example. So that was something that existed before the Affordable Care Act, and it would exist if you repealed every single sentence. If you just had a one-sentence bill that said, HR or whatever is hereby repealed, you would still take care of people in nursing homes. You would still take care of children. You would still take care of people that were at 100% of poverty level or below. So the Affordable Care Act changed the rules for what could be done in the marketplace. It changed the rules for people that were between 100% and 138% of poverty. So when you talk about people that would potentially come off of the Affordable Care Act plans, the last thing is everyone would come off of it in that time span because the whole program would die without more cash. So, in that sense, the Affordable Care Act is going to die of its own weight. So it's important for Congress to take action, which is why Republicans have always promised to repeal and replace Obamacare.
Let me ask you,
I think the current measure falls a bit short of that.
Are you in the camp that this is Obamacare light, or do you think it's largely a good plan?
Well, I think it's got some important elements. I think it has something to work with, but it does fall short of the promise. I mean, when you read the bill, it starts off as an amendment to the Affordable Care Act. It's only 123 pages, but by definition, it's an amendment to a 2,700-page bill. When you read down through it, you do see that it repeals large portions of the Affordable Care Act. And one of the big things is, Republicans never said if you like your Obamacare, you can keep your Obamacare. That's similar to a promise that President Obama did make. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. If you like your health care plan, you can keep your health care plan. That proved false. Here, where Republicans said, we're going to repeal Obamacare, I think most everyone, including me, believed that you won't be able to keep your Obamacare, that it will go away at some point. And so what this plan, if it were passed today, would do is it would allow states like Ohio that have taken Medicaid expansion dollars to keep enrolling new enrollees in that Medicaid expansion population. And this is able-bodied adults between 100% and 138% of poverty, that people that
I know we could spend
wouldn't normally qualify for Medicaid. They could keep enrolling till 2020.
I would love to spend the whole time on health. I will get in one more question on healthcare, though. Do you think that it should just all be dismantled entirely and we start over?
Yeah, I think it's important that we do what we said we would do. And when you look at the bill today, I think the big concern that a lot of people have is that this carries on the total framework. A lot of it goes through the framework of Obamacare because of the rules of the Senate. And that sounds a lot like excuses for back home. We said we were going to repeal and replace it, and we're trying to jump through hoops for a parliamentarian and blame some government employee instead of taking action as a Congress to do it. This is a good effort. It's a better bill than it was last week. I'm hopeful that we can make it the kind of bill that will do what we told voters we would do.
Let's talk about wiretapping. Today, Republican and Democratic leaders of the House Intelligence Committee said they have no evidence that the Obama administration wiretapped or surveilled then candidate Trump's offices or campaign last year. Your reaction to this, and do you think the president misstepped in some of the comments he's made about wiretapping?
Well, I haven't seen the evidence. There's been a lot of pressure on him to say, where did you get this idea at? And I think that the pressure is rightly directed into the Intelligence Committee. So everything related to how we're doing that is being looked into in the House Intelligence Committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee. There's been a lot of serious accusations about Russia and frankly about the Trump administration, but also predating that about really going back to President Bush when he looked Putin in the eyes and looked into his soul. So what is the United States relationship with Russia like, particularly under Vladimir Putin? Under Hillary Clinton, we had some deals with our nuclear materials and how that's transferred, and there was a lot of allegations about how that played out with the Clinton Foundation and about how things played out with classified material that she handled. So if you take a broad view of what our relationship is like with Russia, I think it's something the intelligence committees should spend time on.
Do you think the president acted appropriately in tweeting that there was wiretapping?
Well, I don't really talk about President Trump's Twitter account. I talk about the issues, whether he's tweeting about them or not.
Fair enough. Now, I know you want to talk about the Drain the Swamp legislation that you have, which is saying that government agencies would relocate their employees and headquarters out of Washington, D.C. by 2023. So a lot of time to do the movement, but only retain a few employees. I guess the idea is to make them more in touch with people outside the Beltway. And it's also very expensive to live in Washington, D.C. But do you think something like that would really work, and would it pass?
I think I'm very encouraged. The more people hear about the idea, the more excited they are about it. And just this week, a very similar measure, though with less, force behind it, a sense of Congress, piece of legislation or piece of committee action came out of Chairman Chaffetz of Oversight and Government Reform. That's the Committee of Jurisdiction. And so it's the sense of Congress that this should happen. And so that's been well received in Congress. It's been well received from what I gather in the White House. And the bill that Ted Budd and I have proposed would go one step further and say, give us a plan. And so one, it says the same sort of thing, but two, it tells the secretaries, please take a look at your organizational structure and decide what should move. So when you move, normally you say, well, what do I need to take with me? What do I need to keep? What can I put in storage? And here you look at the org chart, you talk about the CBO. CBO would like to score this bill. How could they possibly give it a score when they don't know yet what the secretaries would say they would move and what they would keep? So these are the kinds of theoretical challenges that CBO gets into sometimes, when the reality is the concept behind the bill is they would take the Department of Education, for example. There's a lot of talk about potentially restructuring that 4,500 employee organization. Do all 4,500 of those employees need to be in this area? Do you even need 4,500 employees? Should that structure look the same? The FBI, for example, is talking about building a $3 billion building. Do they need to build a building if they're going to locate somewhere in the United States that already has open real estate? Or if they're locating somewhere else, could it cost significantly less? Mm-hmm. So those are the kinds of things this does. And then lastly, as you started off, it just pushes the people that are in the regulatory agencies outside the Beltway bubble, where regulators hang out with other regulators and start talking about regulating things.
Yeah,
and if they were out in communities, they would spend at least part of their time talking about the things regular people talk about.
In the interest of time, I mentioned you're new to our audience. Can you sum up quickly how you are different or similar than your predecessor, Congressman John Boehner.
Well, we both had manufacturing. That's similar in our background. He's got a much better tan than I do. And I think, you know, when you look at it that, people will draw their own conclusions. When he started out, he was in a group that was pushing the edge in Congress, and I guess I am too. And he stayed here for a long time, and time will tell whether I stay here further. But, you know, I don't intend to be here for the kind of time that he was, 25 years. But, you know, when you look at it, I think some of the same challenges are out there today. So he pushed to end earmarks. We're talking about earmarks later this session. I hope that we keep the ban on earmarks. He pushed to control the budget. Although the sequester has been a brutal tool, it's hurt our military. That did control discretionary spending. And frankly, the challenge of growing automatic spending or mandatory spending has only gotten worse over that time. So, you know, it's a challenge that we still have to deal with today. If we're going to make sure we don't bankrupt America, we have to take action.
40 minutes ago, as expected, the Federal Reserve raised a key interest rate 0.25%. Fed on the right track here, and they also indicated 2 more rate hikes likely this year.
I think it's very encouraging to hear the Federal Reserve raising rates. 25 basis points is probably what was expected in the market, and you know, it's been delayed a little bit. I think a lot of people have felt like we were artificially keeping rates low, and that's hurt savers. It's also hurt, you know, investment outside of the stock market, and therefore some concern that it's inflated the stock market. So I think the markets will react appropriately. I'm encouraged by the step, and I think it's a good day for monetary policy to see this action.
The executive order to trim and reorganize the executive branch. I know you've been following that closely. That a good thing? Or are we just saying with the EPA, you know, 20% cuts, that's just too across the board? They're giving me a rap. Will you say it's a good thing or a bad thing what's been proposed?
I'm very excited about the order, and it fits nicely with the Drain the Swamp Act.
All right. That was a summary. Thank you for joining us again. We'll have some comments in our 4 and 5:30 newscast, and this will be shown in its entirety at local12.com under Connect to Congress. So nice meeting you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot.